Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We are tackling a subject today that it pretty much defines the entire concept of a modern political scandal.
It really does.
You know the suffix. You just add Duragate to literally anything. Deflategate, Pizzagate, you name it, and it instantly means something.
Right. It implies a cover-up, a conspiracy.
A hidden truth.
Yeah.
And we are, of course, talking about the original, the Watergate scandal.
The one that started it all.
Now, I know what you might be thinking. Everyone feels like they know this story. It's the foundational myth of American political cynicism.
Uh-huh. You've got the basic building blocks, Nixon, the tapes, the resignation.
I am not a crook. All the big lines. It's the high school history version.
Which is, I think, where most people stop. They know how it ends, so they just assume the story in the middle is, a straight line from a burglary to a helicopter lifting off in the South Lawn.
But looking at the source material we're digging into today, which is this incredibly comprehensive breakdown of the whole timeline, not just the highlights, the reality is so much weirder, so much messier.
It is not a straight line. Not at all.
It's a jagged, chaotic line of, frankly, incompetence, bizarre kidnapping plots.
I mean, calm, rational-sounding discussions about firebombing think tanks.
Exactly. And a level of paranoia that is, it's honestly hard to wrap your head around in what's supposed to be a functioning democracy.
And that's the word right there.
Yeah.
Paranoia. You really can't understand Watergate if you just look at it as a single event. You can't just call it a third-rate burglary, which was the famous line at the time.
Right.
You have to see it as the inevitable explosion of a pressure cooker that had been building and building for years.
So that's our mission for this deep dive. We're going to try to move past that dry textbook summary and really unpack what they call the White House horrors. We want to understand how a group of men who were, on paper, the most powerful people in the world, ended up seriously debating whether they should use a yacht full of sex workers to blackmail their political opponents.
It sounds like a bad movie plot.
It does. Or how a simple piece of tape, just a standard piece of adhesive tape on a door latch, managed to completely unravel an entire presidency.
The smallest detail with the biggest consequence.
So let's get into it. The source material makes it really clear. We can't start at the Watergate complex in June of '72. We have to rewind.
We have to go back to the beginning of the Nixon presidency around 1969.
And the atmosphere in that White House, it seems. I mean, it seems like a fortress under siege right from the very beginning.
Absolutely. You have to think about what Nixon inherited when he came into office in '69.
The Vietnam War.
The Vietnam War is absolutely raging. The country is more divided than it's been since the Civil War, and he'd campaigned on this promise to end the war honorably.
A very vague term.
Very vague. And the reality on the ground was a total stalemate. So to try and break that stalemate, he authorizes these secret bombing campaigns in Cambodia.
A neutral country, it's important to note.
A neutral country, exactly. And this was not something he wanted the American public, or even Congress for that matter, to know about.
But secrets don't stay secret for long in Washington.
No. In May of 1969, the New York Times breaks the story. They expose the bombing.
And this seems to be the trigger. This is like patient zero for the paranoia that follows. Nixon didn't just see this as a news leak.
No, he saw it as an act of treason. He took it incredibly personally, and he saw it as a structural threat to the power of the presidency itself.
This is that imperial presidency idea taking root.
It is. Nixon truly believed that the executive branch had an absolute, unquestionable right to conduct foreign policy without any interference, and that anyone who leaked information was, in effect, committing an act of war against his administration.
So his reaction isn't, okay, let's tighten up our security protocols.
Oh, no. His reaction is to go on the offensive, immediately.
He orders wiretaps.
Yes. And not just on the people he suspects leaked it. He taps reporters. He taps his own staff on the National Security Council. He wants to know who is talking to whom.
And J. Edgar Hoover, the FBI, was, not moving fast enough?
Well, Hoover was a complicated figure. He had his own power base. And he pushed back on some of the more aggressive surveillance requests. Sometimes he'd just slow walk them.
So Nixon's inner circle decides to just go around the official channels.
They decided to bypass the FBI completely. This is the moment that always gets me. You have the entire apparatus of the U.S. government at your disposal, and John Ehrlichman, the domestic policy chief, just decides, nah, we'll set up our own private investigation unit.
It speaks to a profound level of distrust in the very institutions they're supposed to be running.
Deep distrust. So they hire these two guys, Jack Caulfield and Anthony Ilasovich.
And these aren't, like, seasoned CIA analysts?
Not at all. They were former NYPD detectives. They were street guys. Their job was to dig up dirt, follow people around, essentially act as the president's private eyes.
It feels less like intelligence work and more like something out of a pulp detective novel.
That's a perfect way to put it. But things really, really escalate with the Pentagon Papers.
Okay, so that was the catalyst that pushed them from shady private investigators into outright criminal activity.
It was June 1971. The New York Times starts publishing the Pentagon Papers, this massive 7,000-page secret history of U.S. involvement in Vietnam, and it had been leaked by a man named Daniel Ellsberg.
Now, I was reading in the notes here that Nixon's initial reaction was actually kind of muted. He wasn't that worried.
That's right. His first political instinct was, well, hang on. This report mostly covers the Kennedy and Johnson years. This makes the Democrats look bad, not me.
But that's not how everyone saw it.
No. Henry Kissinger, his national security advisor, absolutely lost his mind. He was furious. Ellsberg had been a mentee of his, someone he had brought into the inner circle.
So for Kissinger, it was personal.
Deeply personal. And he went to Nixon and essentially argued, if you let this stand, if you can't control your own secrets, the entire world will see you as weak. The Soviets will see you as weak. The North Vietnamese will see you as weak.
He basically goaded Nixon into a rage.
He whipped him into what H.R. Haldeman, Nixon's chief of staff, later described in his diary as a frenzy.
So they're trying to stop it legally.
They do. The administration goes to court to try and block the publication. It goes all the way to the Supreme Court, and they lose. It was a huge, humiliating public defeat for Nixon.
And at that point, they decide that the legal route is a dead end.
And if the law doesn't work for you, you go outside the law. This is when the order comes down from the top, stop the leaks by any means necessary.
By any means. That phrase is doing a lot of heavy lifting.
It is. And by any means led directly to the creation of the Special Investigations Unit.
Better known to history by the greatest, most perfect nickname in all of politics, the Plumbers.
It really is an incredible name.
How did they even get it?
It's almost disappointingly simple. David Young, one of the aides running the unit, was talking to his grandmother on the phone. He told her his new job in the White House was to stop leaks.
Oh, no.
And she just said, oh, that's nice, dear, so you're a plumber. He thought it was funny, so he put a sign on his office door that said, The Plumbers, and the name just stuck.
But the men they hired for this unit were not plumbers. They were very serious and very strange operators.
This is where we meet the two architects of the whole disaster, E. Howard Hunt and G. Gordon Liddy.
Okay, tell us about them. Hunt was ex-CIA.
Yes, a real old-school Cold Warrior. He was a veteran of the Bay of Pigs invasion, a bit of a washed-up spy who was writing spy novels on the side. He really lived in this world of cloak and dagger.
And Liddy?
Liddy was. Well, he was G. Gordon Liddy. He was almost a category unto himself. He was ex-FBI, but he was this incredibly flamboyant, intense personality, obsessed with Nietzschean ideas of will and power.
The source material describes him in a way that honestly makes him sound like a Batman villain.
That's not far off. To give you a sense of his mindset, he originally wanted to name their little group Odessa.
Odessa? What's that?
It was the rumored name of the secret network of former SS officers who helped Nazis escape from Europe after World War II.
Wait. He wanted to name a White House unit after a supposed Nazi escape network.
Yes. And the truly terrifying thing isn't just that he suggested it, it's that nobody in the White House immediately fired him for suggesting it.
That tells you everything you need to know about the culture they were building.
They valued that kind of ruthless, amoral, can-do attitude, and they didn't really care about the package it came in.
So the Plumbers have their mandate, stop the leaks. Their first major target is the man who started it all, Daniel Ellsberg.
Right, but they aren't trying to prove he leaked the papers. Everybody already knew that.
They wanted to destroy him personally.
They wanted kompromat, as the Russians would say.
Yep.
They were convinced that if they could dig into his psychiatric history, they could find something to discredit him as a nutcase, a deviant, something to smear him with.
So they hatched a plan to break into the office of his psychiatrist, a Dr. Lewis Fielding.
This is the Fielding break-in, September 1971. And you can really see this as the dress rehearsal for Watergate.
The same playbook.
The exact same playbook. And it was, by all accounts, a complete disaster. They flew in a team of Cuban exiles from Miami.
The same guys who would later be at the Watergate.
The very same guys. Veterans of the Bay of Figs who were fiercely loyal to Hunt. They broke into the doctor's office in Beverly Hills, they pried open the filing cabinets with a crowbar, and they totally trashed the place.
High trash it.
To create a cover story. They wanted it to look like a robbery gone wrong, like some drug addict was looking for cash or pills.
Did they find anything on Ellsberg?
It's a bit of a mystery. Liddy, in his memoir, claims they found absolutely nothing. Other accounts from inside the unit suggest they did find Ellsberg's file and that Hunt immediately sent it over to the CIA.
Which would be highly illegal.
Highly illegal. But either way, the operational result was a total failure. They'd committed a federal crime, they left a huge physical trail of destruction, and they gained zero political leverage from it.
Now, a normal person, a normal organization, would look at that botched burglary and think, okay, let's pull back. This is too risky.
But they didn't. They did the opposite. They expanded the scope of their operations. The list of what came to be known as the White House horrors from this period it's just insane.
It truly is. Let's start with the big one, the proposed firebombing of the Brookings Institution.
Right. Let's just pause on that for a second. The phrase firebombing a Washington, D.C. think tank is a phrase that should not exist in the annals of American politics.
It's mind-boggling. What was the plan? Why?
Nixon was convinced that a safe at the Brookings Institution contained classified documents related to the Vietnam War that he wanted.
So he couldn't just get them legally.
Apparently not. So Liddy's plan was to use firebombs to create a diversion. You set the building on fire, and in the ensuing chaos, you send your team in disguised as firefighters.
Oh, come on.
I'm serious. They would rush in, ostensibly to fight the fire, but their real mission was to break open the safe and rescue the documents before the real fire department got there.
It is literally the plot of a heist movie, a really badly written heist movie.
Thankfully, even for them, that plan was ultimately rejected as being a little too extreme.
A little too extreme, that's reassuring.
But they had other projects. They started digging into Ted Kennedy's Chappaquiddick accident, trying to find more dirt on him.
They forged diplomatic cables.
Yes, this one is just incredible. They forged State Department cables to try and retroactively link President John F. Kennedy to the 1963 assassination of the South Vietnamese president, Nguyen Ngo Dinh Diem.
That's not just dirty tricks. That's historical revisionism. It's disinformation warfare against a deceased president from your rival party.
It's a level of political poison that is hard to fathom. And there was even another plan targeting Ellsberg.
What now?
Liddy proposed drugging him with LSD right before he was scheduled to give a big public speech. The idea was that he'd get on stage and start rambling incoherently, and he'd be discredited as a drug-addled lunatic on national television.
It's terrifying because it shows there were no lines. There were absolutely no boundaries. They weren't willing to at least discuss crossing.
None whatsoever.
And this brings us into the election year, 1972. The Plumbers unit is officially dissolved, but the key personnel, Liddy and Hunt, they don't go away.
No, they just get a new job. They're transferred over to the campaign.
To the Committee for the Re-election of the President.
CRP.
Or, as it became affectionately known, CREEP.
The acronym that just keeps on giving.
So Liddy becomes the general counsel for CREEP. And our source says he was introduced to the campaign leadership explicitly as the man in charge of dirty tricks.
They weren't even hiding it. And in January of 1972, Liddy walks into the office of the Attorney General of the United States, John Mitchell.
Who, it's crucial to remember, is also the head of the CRP at this point. He's wearing two hats.
Exactly. And Liddy comes in with these big, professionally prepared presentation charts to pitch a massive program of covert operations, codename Operation Gemstone.
Liddy and his code names. So what was in Operation Gemstone? What was he pitching to the Attorney General?
Okay, so let's break down the options he presented. First, there was Operation Diamond.
Diamond. Sounds glamorous.
It was a plan to deal with the anti-war protesters they expected at the upcoming Republican National Convention in Miami.
And how are they going to deal with them?
Liddy proposed that they would identify the ringleaders of the protest groups, kidnap them off the street,
Just kidnap them.
drug them, and then transport them to a secret safe house in Mexico and hold them there until the convention was over.
So casual international kidnapping of American citizens. That's Plan A.
That's Plan A. Then there was Operation Sapphire.
Okay.
This involved chartering a high-end yacht, staffing it with very expensive sex workers, and equipping it with hidden cameras and microphones.
I think I see where this is going.
The plan was to lure prominent Democratic officials onto the yacht, get them into compromising situations, and film the whole thing for blackmail material.
That's a honeypot scheme.
A literal floating honeypot.
What else was on the menu? Operation Turquoise.
Operation Turquoise was, in comparison, almost comically petty. The plan was simply to sabotage the air conditioning system at the Democratic National Convention, which was also in Miami.
Wait.
The goal was just to make the convention hall unbearably hot and humid so that when the TV cameras were rolling, all the delegates would look sweaty, angry, and uncomfortable.
So the plans range from kidnapping, which is a major felony, to a high school prank.
It's an incredible spectrum of illegality and absurdity, and there was one more, Operation Emerald, which involved using a spy plane to intercept the communications of the Democratic candidate's campaign jet.
So here's the moment. This is the pivotal moment in the entire scandal. Liddy presents these options: kidnapping, prostitution, sabotage to John Mitchell.
The chief law enforcement officer of the United States.
And Mitchell's response is not, "Gordon, you are insane and you're under arrest."
No. His response, and this is a near direct quote, was basically, "Gordon, this is not realistic and it costs too much money."
It was a budget dispute. He didn't object on moral or legal grounds. He objected on budgetary grounds.
Exactly. The initial price tag for Operation Gemstone was $1 million. Mitchell balked at the price. He told Liddy to go back to the drawing board and come back with a scaled-down, more realistic version.
And that scaled-down, cheaper, more realistic version was the Watergate break-in.
That was the compromise. They would target the Democratic National Committee, the DNC headquarters at the Watergate office complex.
And what was the specific goal? What were they looking for?
The approved plan had two main objectives: photograph any interesting documents they could find in the files, and plant bugs on two key telephones.
Whose phones?
The phone of Larry O'Brien, who was the DNC chairman, and another DNC official named R. Spencer Oliver.
Why O'Brien? Was there some specific dirt they thought he had?
Well, there are a few competing theories on that. The standard explanation is that they were just on a general fishing expedition. They wanted financial documents, campaign strategy, anything they could use.
But there are other theories.
There is a more salacious theory, one that Liddy himself pushed in his book later on, that they were actually looking for evidence related to a supposed call girl ring.
The sexpionage angle again.
Right. The theory was that this ring was being used by DNC staffers, and they wanted proof to use for blackmail. But it's worth noting that John Dean and most of the other main figures have always dismissed that as a self-serving fantasy from Liddy.
But whatever the specific motive, the plan was approved. Gordon Liddy finally got his go order for a black bag operation.
He got his budget, and he started assembling the team.
So let's meet the players who are actually going to carry out this third-rate burglary. First up, we have James McCord.
McCord was the security chief for the CRP, another ex-CIA guy, but he was more of a technician. He was their electronics and bugging expert.
Then we have the guys who did the physical breaking and entering, the Cubans.
Yes. Bernard Barker, Virgilio Gonzalez, Eugenio Martinez, and Frank Sturgis, who wasn't actually Cuban, but he was an American soldier of fortune who was deeply embedded in the anti-Castro movement in Miami.
And for these men, this wasn't just a simple burglary, was it?
No, you have to understand their mindset. They saw this as a patriotic duty. They were told that the Democrats were secretly taking money from Fidel Castro, that they were communists in disguise. For them, this was a legitimate operation in the ongoing war against communism.
They were true believers being manipulated by Hunt and Liddy.
Absolutely. And Hunt and Liddy were supposed to be overseeing the whole thing from a safe distance.
From a command post across the street.
At the Howard Johnson's motel, watching from a balcony.
Now, the break-in on June 17th is the one everyone knows. But the source material really highlights that this was not their first attempt. And the run-up to it was basically a comedy of errors.
Oh, they were shockingly bad at this. They were the gang that couldn't shoot straight.
So walk us through the failed attempts.
Okay, so attempt number 1 is on May 26. Hunt and Martinez go to the Watergate to try and pick the lock on the DNC office door. They fail. And somehow, in the process, they manage to get themselves locked inside an adjacent banquet room overnight. Wait, they got locked in.
They just had to sit there in the dark until the hotel staff came and unlocked the doors in the morning?
That is just beyond humiliating.
So they regroup. Attempt number 2 is the next night, May 27th. This time they bring Virgilio Gonzalez, who was supposed to be their master locksmith.
Okay, so this time it should work.
Except Gonzalez gets to the door and realizes he brought the wrong set of lock-picking tools.
You cannot make this stuff up.
So they have to abort again. But finally, on May 28th, attempt number 3, they get in.
Sis.
Temporary success. They get in, they plant the bugs, they use a camera to photograph a stack of documents, but the mission is still considered a failure.
Why?
2 reasons. First, the photos they took were all blurry and unreadable. John Mitchell later supposedly complained that they were shitty. And second, the bug they planted on Larry O'Brien's phone was defective. It wasn't working properly.
So the hubris just completely takes over.
Yeah.
Instead of counting their losses and walking away, they decide they have to go back in. They have to go back in to fix the equipment. And that fateful decision brings us to the night of June 17th, 1972.
The team goes back in. James McCord, the tech guy, is responsible for setting up their entry and exit route through the parking garage.
And this involves taping the door latches so they don't lock behind them.
And this is it. This is the tiny detail that brings the whole thing crashing down. The piece of tape.
McCord makes a critical, amateurish mistake. He places the piece of tape horizontally across the latch bolt.
Which means it's visible.
It's clearly visible from the outside of the door. A professional would have put it on vertically, or it would have been hidden by the door frame.
Enter Frank Wills.
Frank Wills, a 24-year-old security guard at the complex, making, I think, about $80 a week. He's just doing his regular rounds. He comes to the door and he sees the tape.
He doesn't immediately think international espionage.
No, of course not. He thinks it's a maintenance crew. He assumes a cleaner taped the door open to take out the trash or something.
Wow.
So he just peels the tape off, drops it in his pocket, and goes to get a burger.
And the burglars, what do?
They're already inside at this point. But later, when they're leaving, they find the door is locked again. And instead of aborting the mission, which any sane operative would do after realizing they've been discovered,
McCord retapes the door.
he picks the lock and puts a new piece of tape on the door in the exact same way.
Unbelievable.
So Frank Wills comes back from his break, he does his rounds again, he gets to the same door, and he sees the tape is back. And that's when he realizes, okay, this isn't the maintenance crew, something is wrong here. So he calls the police.
And here's the final beautiful layer of irony in this whole Keystone Cops arrest. The police who respond, they don't exactly look like police officers.
Not at all. The dispatcher sends the nearest available unit, which happens to be an unmarked car from the D.C. Police Vice Squad.
What were they doing?
They were undercover, dressed as hippies, long hair, jeans, T-shirts, because they had been in a nearby park looking for drug deals.
So Alfred Baldwin, the lookout in the Howard Johnsons across the street, he sees this car pull up.
Right. He looks out his window, he sees these scruffy-looking guys get out of an old car, and he doesn't radio a warning.
Because he thinks they're just kids going to a party.
Exactly. He completely ignores them. By the time he sees lights flashing on and off inside the DNC offices on the 6th floor, it's far too late to warn anyone.
The police catch them red-handed.
They catch all 5 burglars hiding behind a partition in the office. They're arrested at gunpoint.
And when the police search them, the entire conspiracy begins to unravel almost immediately.
It wasn't just the sophisticated bugging equipment they had that was bad enough. It was the cash.
Right. The sequential $100 bills.
Thousands of dollars in crisp, brand new, sequentially numbered $100 bills. But the most devastating discovery of all, they had address books on them.
And in those address books were the names E. Howard Hunt and W. House.
It was the smoking gun before the smoking gun tape. The police and the FBI immediately had a direct physical link from these 5 burglars to a consultant working for the White House. The cover-up had to begin before the sun came up.
Okay, so let's shift to the cover-up. It is the morning of June 18th. The 5 burglars are in jail. What is the immediate reaction inside the Nixon orbit?
It's a combination of panic and frantic destruction of evidence. Liddy rushes to the CRP offices and starts shredding piles and piles of documents.
And Jeb Magruder, the deputy campaign manager.
He takes the Gemstone files, the charts Liddy had used in his presentation home with him, and literally burns them in his fireplace.
But the FBI is good at what it does. They don't need the Gemstone files. They have the money.
This is the real-life follow the money. Those $100 bills all have serial numbers, and the FBI starts meticulously tracing them.
And where does that trail lead?
It leads to a bank account in Miami, an account controlled by Bernard Barker, one of the burglars.
Okay, and where did Barker get that money?
Well, the FBI found that Barker's account had received several checks from a man named Kenneth Dahlberg.
And who was Kenneth Dahlberg?
He was a Nixon campaign fundraiser from the Midwest. He told the FBI, yeah, I collected donations, turned them into a cashier's check, and I handed that check to the committee to re-elect the president.
So the chain is complete. The burglars were paid with Nixon campaign funds.
It's an undeniable link. Now, while the FBI is methodically following this paper trail, the White House is trying to silence the human trail. And this brings us to the really tragic story of Martha Mitchell.
We absolutely have to talk about her.
Mm-hmm.
Because for so long, the media and the public treated her like a joke, like this kooky alcoholic character. But when you look at the source material, what happened to her was, it was extraordinary violence.
It was horrific. Martha was John Mitchell's wife. And she wasn't just a political spouse, she was a celebrity in her own right. She was famous for being incredibly outspoken for these late-night phone calls she'd make to reporters.
She was in California when the break-in happened.
Yes, she was there for a campaign event, and she's watching the news, and she sees James McCord's face on TV, and she recognizes him instantly.
He was her family's former bodyguard.
Right. And in that moment, she knows. She knows her husband, the attorney general, has to be involved in this. And John Mitchell knows that she knows, and he knows she will talk.
So he essentially has her put under guard.
He leaves her in California under the watch of a security agent named Steve King, a former FBI agent. And his orders are explicit. Do not let her speak to the press.
And when she tries to.
She manages to get Helen Thomas, the legendary reporter, on the phone. She starts saying things like, "They don't want me to talk." And Steve King bursts into the room and rips the telephone cord directly out of the wall.
That's assault.
It gets so much worse. The source describes how 5 men then held her down on her bed while a doctor came in and forcibly injected her with a powerful sedative.
They drugged her against her will.
They held her prisoner in that hotel room for days. When she was finally allowed to leave, she had visible black and blue bruises all over her arms. She told reporters she'd been held captive.
And what was the administration's response to these accusations?
Gaslighting. Pure and simple. They launched a smear campaign. They told the press she was an alcoholic, that she was having a nervous breakdown, that she needed psychiatric help. They systematically destroyed her credibility to hide their crime.
It's where we get the term the Martha Mitchell effect.
Exactly. When a medical professional wrongly diagnoses a patient's true, accurate beliefs as being delusions, Nixon himself later said on the tapes, if it hadn't been for Martha Mitchell, there'd have been no Watergate.
It's chilling. So while Martha is being held captive, Nixon is in the Oval Office just 6 days after the break-in. This is June 23, 1972, and he's hatching the plan to shut down the FBI investigation.
This is the conversation that is captured on what will become known as the smoking gun tape.
Right. Nixon and Haldeman are in the Oval Office. They know the FBI is tracing the money trail back to the campaign. They need to stop it.
So Haldeman comes up with what he calls the CIA defense.
What's that?
The plan was to have the director of the CIA call the acting director of the FBI and tell him, essentially, stop investigating this money trail from Mexico.
Yeah.
If you keep digging, you're going to compromise sensitive, ongoing national security operations related to the CIA.
Was that true? Were there any CIA operations at risk?
Not at all. It was a complete and total lie. But it was a very clever lie, because it played on the CIA's sensitivity about their past failures, specifically the Bay of Pigs.
So they were using the CIA as a shield to obstruct justice.
They were using the specter of national security to block a criminal investigation. And Nixon signs off on it. You can hear him on the tape telling Haldeman, play it tough.
And that moment right there, that is the crime. That's unambiguous obstruction of justice from the President of the United States.
It is. But the crucial point to remember is that at this time, nobody knows this tape exists. It just goes into the vault, a secret ticking time bomb.
So for the moment, the cover-up actually holds. The 1972 election happens in November.
And Nixon wins in one of the biggest landslides in American history. He wins 49 out of 50 states. The public, for the most part, still sees Watergate as just some weird, minor caper that didn't involve the president.
They survived the election, but they couldn't survive the legal system. In January 1973, the trial of the 7 Watergate conspirators begins.
And this is where the system starts to push back, and it pushes back in the form of the presiding judge, John Sirica.
Maximum John, they called him.
Yes, and he was not a judge who would just sit back passively. He was deeply suspicious of the whole case. The prosecution's theory, which was also the White House's official story, was that Liddy and McCord were rogue agents, that they had acted completely on their own.
And Sirica just didn't buy that.
Not for a second. He looked at these men, ex-CIA, ex-FBI professionals, and he couldn't understand what their motive would be. Why would they risk everything for this? He kept interrupting the trial, grilling witnesses himself. He was actively digging for the truth right from the bench.
And all the while, the White House is frantically trying to keep the defendants quiet.
They're paying them hush money. hundreds of thousands of dollars in secret cash payments. Delivered by Anthony Ulasevich, the ex-cop, in paper bags left in airport lockers and phone booths.
They were buying silence. And for a while, it seemed to be working.
It did. The burglars all pled guilty. Liddy was convicted. Nobody talked.
Until sentencing day.
This is where Sirica plays his trump card. It was a brilliant legal move. He provisionally sentences the burglars to incredibly long prison terms. We're talking 35, 40 years. But he says he will review those sentences in 3 months.
The message was crystal clear.
It was. Cooperate, tell me the truth, and I can reduce your sentence. Stay silent, and you will die in prison.
And that threat was enough to crack James McCord.
On March 23, 1973, just before his final sentencing, McCord hands a letter to Judge Sirica. Sirica reads it aloud in open court, and it is an absolute bombshell.
What did it say?
McCord admitted that perjury was committed during the trial. He admitted that political pressure had been applied to him and the other defendants to plead guilty and remain silent. And most importantly, he said that higher-ups were involved in the conspiracy and had not been identified.
The dam breaks.
The dam breaks. And that letter leads directly to the Senate establishing an investigative committee.
The Ervin Committee.
The Senate Watergate Committee, chaired by Sam Ervin, a Democrat from North Carolina. He had this public persona of being a folksy, simple country lawyer, but he was actually a brilliant constitutional scholar.
And these hearings were televised? This became national event television?
It was. The whole country just stopped working to watch them. It was the original must-see TV. And the star witness, the man who blew the whole thing open, was John Dean.
White House counsel John Dean. He's a tragic figure in some ways.
He is. He was this young, incredibly ambitious lawyer who had been tasked with managing the cover-up. But he began to realize that Nixon, Haldeman, and Ehrlichman were setting him up. They were going to make him the scapegoat for the whole affair.
So he decides to flip to save himself.
He goes to the prosecutors, and then he sits in that hearing room for days in his horn-rimmed glasses, and in this very flat, monotone voice, he lays out everything.
He talks about the cancer on the presidency.
Yes, he details the hush money payments, the offers of presidential clemency, the creation of the enemies list, and he directly, personally implicates President Nixon in the cover-up.
But, and this is a huge problem for the committee, it's still his word against the president's word.
And Richard Nixon is still a very popular president in many parts of the country. To them, Dean just looks like a disgruntled employee, a rat trying to save his own skin. The committee needed corroboration. They needed hard proof.
And that proof walked in the door in the form of a minor aide named Alexander Butterfield.
Friday the 13th, July, 1973, a date that will live in infamy for Richard Nixon. Butterfield is a deputy assistant to the president. He's being interviewed by the committee staff behind closed doors, just a routine interview.
They're asking him basic questions about how the White House records conversations, meeting minutes, things like that.
Right. And then a staffer asks, almost as a throwaway question at the end of the day, is there any other system in place for recording conversations?
And Butterfield pauses.
He pauses, and then he says, very quietly, I was aware of listening devices. Yes, sir.
The silence in that room must have been absolutely deafening.
It changed world history. Butterfield revealed that since 1971, Nixon had a secret, voice-activated taping system installed in the Oval Office. It recorded everything.
The meetings with Dean about the cover-up, the meetings with Haldeman about using the CIA, the meetings with Mitchell, it was all on tape.
All of it.
Why? I mean, why would a man so paranoid about leaks and secrets tape himself committing federal crimes?
A combination of hubris and a misguided sense of history. He wanted to write his memoirs. He saw himself as a great statesman, on par with Churchill or de Gaulle. He wanted a perfect, secret record of his own brilliance for future historians to study.
He never imagined that a court would force him to release those tapes while he was still in office.
Never in a million years. So the entire focus of the scandal shifts overnight. It's no longer about who you believe. It's about getting the tapes.
The new special prosecutor, Archibald Cox, immediately subpoenas 9 of the tapes.
And Nixon immediately refuses. He claims executive privilege.
What's the argument there?
The argument is that a president needs to be able to get candid, honest advice from his aides, and they won't give it if they think their private conversations will be made public. He argues that the separation of powers means the courts simply can't compel the president to release his internal records.
This standoff leads to probably the most dramatic weekend in the history of the Justice Department.
The Saturday Night Massacre, October 20th, 1973. Nixon has had enough of Cox. He decides he wants him fired, so he calls his Attorney General, Elliot Richardson.
And Richardson is a man of real integrity. He had promised the Senate during his confirmation hearings that the special prosecutor would have full independence.
So when Nixon gives him the order to fire Cox, Richardson refuses. He flies to the White House and resigns on the spot rather than carry out an order he believes is wrong.
So Nixon moves down the chain of command. He calls the Deputy Attorney General, William Ruckelshaus.
You're the acting AG now. You fire him.
Ruckelshaus also refuses, so Nixon fires him.
Now, the Justice Department is essentially headless. We are down to the number 3 official, the Solicitor General.
Robert Bork.
And Bork agrees to do it.
He does. He later said he did it because he believed someone had to stay and run the department to prevent total chaos. So he wrote the letter. He officially fired Archibald Cox.
And the public reaction?
It was an absolute firestorm. The FBI was sent to seal off the special prosecutor's offices. The news broke on a Saturday night. It looked, for all the world, like a coup. It looked like the president was dismantling the Justice Department to save his own skin.
The public went ballistic. Telegrams flooded Washington. Western Union literally couldn't keep up with the volume. 500,000 messages poured in. There were spontaneous protests. And congressmen who had been defending Nixon suddenly started using the word impeachment.
He thought firing Cox would end the investigation.
Instead, it guaranteed his impeachment would begin.
So he's forced to appoint a new special prosecutor, Leon Jaworski, and he's forced to finally start handing over some of the subpoena tapes, which is where we discover the famous gap.
The 18-and-a-half-minute gap. One of the key tapes, a conversation between Nixon and Haldeman just 3 days after the break-in, had this long, loud buzzing sound right where the conversation should have been.
And the official explanation was creative.
Nixon's loyal secretary, Rosemary Woods, took the blame. She claims she must have accidentally erased it while transcribing the tape.
The Rosemary stretch.
Yes. She claims she was reaching for the phone but accidentally kept her foot on the transcriber's control pedal, erasing the tape. They even had her pose for photographs, trying to reenact this position.
And it was physically impossible.
Completely impossible. And later, a panel of audio experts analyzed the tape. They found it wasn't one single accidental erasure. The tape had been deliberately erased and rewound at least 5 separate times.
It was a clear, intentional destruction of evidence. And everyone knew it.
Everyone knew it.
By early 1974, the walls are just closing in from every direction. Nixon tries one last gambit. He decides to release edited transcripts of the tapes to the public.
The famous Blue Book. His hope was this would satisfy everyone and make the issue go away.
But this backfired spectacularly.
It was a catastrophe for him. Even with all the swear words replaced with the phrase expletive deleted, the content of those transcripts was just shocking to the American public.
It wasn't the crime, it was the character.
Exactly. The tapes didn't show a noble statesman struggling with a crisis. They showed a petty, vindictive, bigoted man obsessed with getting revenge on his enemies. His own political base, the so-called silent majority of moral conservatives, were horrified by his language and his character.
Then comes the final, fatal blow from the Supreme Court.
United States v. Nixon, July 24th, 1974. The court rules, 8-0, that he must turn over the remaining tapes.
8-0. His own conservative appointees voted against him.
They did. The court ruled that while executive privilege is a real concept, it is not absolute, and it cannot be used to withhold evidence in a criminal investigation. He had no more legal road to run.
And that final batch of tapes included the June 23rd smoking gun tape.
The one where he is heard clearly and unambiguously ordering the CIA to be used to obstruct the FBI investigation. Once that tape became public, his support on Capitol Hill just stifled. It vanished overnight.
Which leads to that famous final meeting in the Oval Office.
Yes. Senator Barry Goldwater, the conscience of the Republican Party, along with the GOP leadership, goes to the White House to meet with the president.
And they deliver the bad news.
It's the end. Nixon asks them frankly what his chances are in a Senate impeachment trial. And Goldwater is brutally honest. He says, "Mr. President, you have maybe 4 or 5 votes in the Senate, and I am not one of them."
He needed 34 votes to survive. He had maybe 4.
The game was over. The next day, August 8th, 1974, Richard Nixon goes on national television and announces his resignation. On August 9, he gives that famous wave from the helicopter door, and Gerald Ford becomes president.
Our long national nightmare is over.
So he said. But there's a very controversial coda to this story. A month later, President Ford issues a full and unconditional pardon for Richard Nixon.
A decision that almost certainly cost him the 1976 election. It destroyed his political career.
It did. Ford's argument was that the country couldn't move on, it couldn't heal, if it had to endure a years-long trial of a former president. He wanted to close the book. But for millions of Americans, it just looked like a corrupt bargain. It looked like the elites protecting one of their own.
It felt like the principle of equal justice under law didn't apply to the man at the very top.
Exactly.
So as we wrap this all up, let's just talk for a minute about the legacy. Beyond the Gate suffix being attached to every scandal, how did this fundamentally change the DNA of America?
I think the biggest casualty was trust. It absolutely destroyed public trust in government. Before Watergate, despite all the turmoil of Vietnam, there was still a sort of baseline assumption that the president, whoever he was at least trying to act in the national interest.
And after Watergate?
After Watergate, the baseline assumption for many people became that the government is probably lying to you. That cynicism became deeply embedded in the culture.
It also led to a wave of reforms. New laws were passed.
Oh, yes. We got the Privacy Act, major amendments to the Freedom of Information Act. The FISA courts were created to oversee government surveillance. We tried to build institutional guardrails to prevent something like this from ever happening again.
But those guardrails are only as strong as the people who are supposed to be enforcing them.
That's the constant struggle. And of course, it completely changed journalism.
Woodward and Bernstein became celebrities, folk heroes.
The idea of the adversarial press, of the journalist's job being to hold power to account, became the dominant model. And the deep throat archetype, the brave, anonymous source leaking secrets from inside the system, became the blueprint for modern investigative reporting.
I want to leave our listeners with one final thought, a kind of counterfactual that really struck me while going through the source material.
Sure.
It's about luck.
Yeah.
We tell this story as a triumph of the American system. The press worked, the courts worked, Congress worked, and they all did. But what if Alexander Butterfield hadn't been asked that one throwaway question? What if he hadn't casually mentioned the taping system? Without the tapes, there was no hard evidence. The cover-up of the actual break-in had been honestly pretty effective. Nixon had destroyed most of the direct evidence. Without the tapes, it was just John Dean's word against the president's.
It's a terrifying thought. The cover-up was holding. Without those tapes, Richard Nixon almost certainly would have finished his second term. The imperial presidency would have been validated. And we might be living in a very, very different constitutional reality today.
It suggests that our democracy wasn't necessarily saved by the grandeur of the system, but maybe by a single accidental, almost lucky admission in a closed-door hearing.
Which is a very fragile thing to have to rely on.
It is indeed. Well, that is our deep dive on Watergate. It's a story of burglars and bugs and a constitutional crisis, but at its heart, it's really a story about the absolute arrogance of power.
And a story about why you should never, ever tape a door latch horizontally.
Words to live by. Thanks for listening. Stay curious, stay skeptical, and we will see you on the next deep dive.